You're listening to Around the Roundhouse, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican. I'm the public safety reporter, Nicholas Gilmore. I'm here today with State Senator Antonio Moe Maestas from District 26. We're going to talk about a few different public safety issues today. First, I wanted to ask about, Senator Maestas reached out to us about a recent fatal crash here in Santa Fe that we've covered. 75-year-old Glen Smith was struck near a bus stop on the south side by the Santa Fe Place Mall. And the driver of the vehicle who struck Smith was a City of Santa Fe bus driver. Police found that there was cause to charge him with careless driving, but since he was driving on private property, they didn't file any charges. And what I kind of wanted to ask you about this case in particular was this question of careless driving and reckless driving. You know, police found that there was not cause for reckless driving, intent or willful, wanton disregard. And so just basically with careless driving and reckless driving, are you finding that these two statutes are working as they should generally?
No, they are. Thank you. Great to be here. District 26, as you know, is the West Mesa of Albuquerque. And yes, careless driving and reckless driving have been on the books since automobiles. There's a famous court case from 1938 that kind of distinguishes the two. And if you are found guilty of, or if you're alleged to have committed reckless driving and committed a vehicular homicide, then it's a crime. It's a crime under the vehicular homicide statute. However, careless driving and speeding and even running a stop sign, if it doesn't rise to the level of reckless, then it's not vehicular homicide. It's just a sad situation where we as a society, because we have gone to a vehicle transportation world in the past 100 years, that certain deaths on the highway are somewhat tolerated outside of the criminal realm. If careless driving in a parking lot were on the books right now, they could charge the driver with careless driving and max him out, so to speak, at 90 days jail. In my opinion, that's just not appropriate. It's either vehicular homicide or it's not. But the careless driving statute is what was opined by the New Mexican that we need to change.
You mentioned, whether that there's no criminal liability, but there is civil liability. And is that, I think what we saw that was kind of surprising was that somebody died in this crash and there wasn't a criminal charge, but I guess there is that civil liability for a lawsuit to come in. And so would you say, is that enough for there to be civil liability, but not criminal liability?
Well, it's never enough. It's never enough when there's a decedent. The family members feel horrible. It should not have happened. It's a human impulse to want justice, to want retribution, to want someone to pay for their gross negligence or whatever you want to describe it. But the vast majority of fatalities on New Mexico's roads involve no crime. And so there's always that civil remedy. And you don't want to compare tragedies to one another. But if this were just some old guy in a pickup truck, he would have a $25,000 policy limit. The city of Santa Fe has a larger policy that hopefully the family can alleviate some of the pain in that lawsuit.
And you mentioned also like non-DWI manslaughter versus DWI crashes, and that non-DWI manslaughter was charged more before this carve out in the legislature 15 years ago. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, thank you. So for centuries, there's been voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter where there's no malice intent. There's no intent to kill. Voluntary manslaughter is, you intended to do the act. You didn't intend for the act to kill someone. Involuntary manslaughter is less than that. Our vehicular homicide statute kind of deviates from that principle. And so homicide by vehicle is if you're intoxicated and you kill someone while driving, or if you are operating a motor vehicle unlawfully, in quotation marks. Unlawful is the reckless driving. So the courts have drawn a line between reckless and careless. So if you're driving recklessly and you kill someone, that's vehicular homicide. If you're driving carelessly, even on a highway, it is deemed an accident and it is not vehicular homicide. So, and the reckless driving, the magic words are, willful or wanton disregard of the rights of others, weaving in and out of traffic all crazy, running 2 or 3 consecutive stoplights, going 30 miles over the speed limit. That's reckless. Careless is just, glancing at your phone, drifting off your lane, or running a stop sign or a red light without that reckless disregard of others.
What discussion do you think that your committee will be having in this coming, session or before this coming
hopefully,
session?
Well, as a result of these articles, hopefully this summer, our committee will be having the same conversation that we're having with the listeners now. But we've had it 12 times.
Yeah.
The careless driving statute it's been proposed to be amended 12 times in the last 15 years. Rick Mieta, the old legislator from Albuquerque, he's a motorcyclist. And every motorcyclist has had colleagues or loved ones killed in a motorcycle crash. So he would come to Santa Fe every year, be a room full of motorcyclists saying, our colleague died and there was no justice. On occasion, the DA will charge the person with reckless driving, and the judge theoretically could give him 90 days under the careless driving statute at 0 to 90 days. Mm-hmm. So he's not really going to jail for killing someone. He's going to jail for driving careless. And is that the proper way to adjudicate these matters? If it's vehicular homicide, he's looking at more than 90 days under the statutes. So it's just a tough gray area. Those 12 bills have all died because at the end of the conversation, a crime is a crime and an accident's an accident. And, motorcyclists die on the roads, God bless them, every day in this country because someone just doesn't see them.
Well, and when you're talking about those bills dying, and I guess the conversation ending up at this, do we need more laws or do we need the current laws to be enforced the way that they are? In this instance, I mean, do you usually come to like the latter conclusion, or that the laws should be enforced?
That's the great debate happening in the Roundhouse now is we need more laws. The average Joe, we need tougher laws. We need more laws.
Tougher sentencing.
We need tougher sentences. And so, the prosecutors are supposed to fit the factual scenario into a particular statute. The statutes are written very broadly so that the prosecutor can, meet the elements of that statute, prove what that statute requires to convict a person of criminal wrongdoing. What we have a tendency of, what this bill proposal does is try to do the opposite. It tries to create a statute dealing with a particularized situation. Somebody killed in a parking lot accident. I don't know if it's happened in Santa Fe in the past generation. I don't know. And so hopefully it never happens again for another 50 years or so. But it's obviously if somebody sees his enemy crossing the parking lot crosswalk and drives into him, that's obviously vehicular homicide. But this situation where the vehicle goes where it wasn't meant to go and kills someone, that's simply not a crime under the old school realm of criminal law. For example, you cannot put a deterrent on an involuntary act. If we put a law that if you killed someone in a parking lot driving a car, if that's a life sentence, it wouldn't prevent the next accident from happening because the person didn't intend to do it. They didn't mean to do it. And so all these logical explanations don't do anybody a darn bit of good if their loved one has been harmed or killed. And that's what's difficult politically in Santa Fe is, it's tough to intellectualize these criminal laws, but that's why we make the big bucks. We have to do that so as not to have 40 or 50 laws on the books that just contradict all the other laws currently in place.
Well, and so I know pedestrian deaths, traffic deaths in general in New Mexico kind of been discussed for years. Is there anything that you think in particular needs changing or should be looked at just in the realm of kind of traffic?
No, great question. I mean, these things should be looked at by engineers, roadways, the curves of the roadways, whether there's blind spots, whether there's proper lighting, stuff like that. And we talk about things like that. And we come to the conclusion that we're doing okay in that general area. But what needs to be talked about is the hardcore alcoholism, homelessness, folks wandering across the street. A lot of the pedestrian deaths that happen in my hometown in Albuquerque happen in a general area where there's a high level of homelessness, public intoxication, and folks who are incredibly intoxicated who find themselves walking in the middle of the road. But we've never talked to OMI, which is the morgue, is the Office of the Medical Investigator. I don't think we've gathered stats on how many pedestrian deaths involve alcohol on the side of the pedestrian. I think that's a key element of what's going on.
And I wanted to switch over and talk a little bit about the Law Enforcement Academy and the Law Enforcement Certification Board, which were both kind of rearranged in recent years by legislation that you sort of sponsored, led on. And we've recently had some tension and change-ups happening over at those which are both sort of under DPS or administratively attached to DPS, however you want to put it. But we had Josh Calder, the CEO of the Law Enforcement Certification Board, was fired in recent months after this sort of months-long, very public dust-up with DPS Secretary Jason Bowie over sort of the certification board's investigations and operations. Now, this is the board that performs misconduct investigations for police, not just state police, but police throughout the state, police agencies, and sheriff's offices. And so this was all changed, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, and Calder had been in that position since October. Now, he claimed that DPS was intervening in his investigations. He opened a misconduct investigation against Jason Bowie, which was then dropped. And then there was also this other complaint against Bowie that alleged he was sort of creating the conditions for conflict of interest at the certification board, and that he wasn't standing it up as its own sort of entity, I think financially, as he should have been according to the statute. And then after that, since then, we've had the Law Enforcement Academy director, Sonia Chavez, who was there for about 1.5 years, who stepped down as well. And of course, she told us that that was not at all related to Calder's firing. But both of these, obviously, the Law Enforcement Academy is focused on training of police officers. Certification Board is misconduct investigations. But both of them were sort of rearranged and, I guess, bifurcated is the word, from this legislation that you sort of led on. And I'm just curious about looking at all this 2-3 years later, if this is going according to plan from your legislation, or if there's, you still think there's more to be done.
Thank you for that. It's a very important aspect of state government. I've been working for the past 5-6 years on modernizing the police as a profession. And we have a fantastic statutory scheme that's not perfect. We need to fix it. What we did is we created a certification board to end any appearance of conflict of interest or direct conflict of interest. Before, the Law Enforcement Academy would train the officers and also grant them certificates or permission to be a police officer. We separated it. So now in statute, the Law Enforcement Academy trains the officers, and the certification board grants the permission.
And each has this board that's kind of over each one.
So the certification board can grant initial permission certifications or suspend or revoke certifications, similar to the bar. You go to law school, you graduate law school, you still have to be a member of the bar. And the bar can take your license if you mess up. That's what we wanted to do. But I take responsibility somewhat in the confusion, because administratively attached is all throughout state government, where we have these agencies floating around that are independent. They're independent agencies, but you have to put them somewhere. So we have a statute, administratively attached statute, that outlines the relationship. And so we have the certification board administratively attached to the department, in this case, the Department of Public Safety. However, when we, because we try to do the right thing and we try to guide our executive partners, we put in more words than we should have. And so the statute reads, the Law Enforcement Certification Board is established and administratively attached to the Department of Public Safety. And we should have put a period. We should have put a period and turned the page. Instead, we wrote comma, and the Department of Public Safety shall provide administrative services for the Certification Board and the Law Enforcement Certification Office. That's where we messed up. We should have just put a period, because there's a whole statutory framework as to what that relationship should be. And so everyone's going to interpret it however they interpret it. I wish the DPS would just ignore that last sentence. But apparently the DPS interpretation is that the office is under DPS, and that this executive director is somehow floating out there in charge of employees in an office that's under DPS. That makes no sense to anybody.
Floating executive director.
So we have to change that. So there became, no one's doing anything nefarious. I don't believe it's not. I thought it was a power trip at first. It's not. It's just a fundamental misunderstanding as to the executive relationships between the two entities. And so we need to erase the magic words, and the department shall provide administrative services for the board and the Law Enforcement Certification Office, and just and either keep it there as an independent agency or move it somewhere else as an independent agency. But DPS should not be involved in any way, shape, or form with that certification board as originally envisioned by the legislature.
Well, and so does that mean that certification board should have its own? I know people were talking about, or during these certification board meetings, their own DFA codes and everything to do their own financial. I mean, should they?
Absolutely. So what happens is to be an administratively attached agency is it belongs there in the flow chart of state government, so to speak. But DFA, Department of Finance Administration, in dealing with employees and HR and paychecks and where the money flows and how the money flows, they're given various codes. And what happened apparently was DPS, because I don't think DPS has ever had an agency attached to it. So he didn't really know what that meant. It's no excuse, I suppose, but DPS did not work with Department of Finance to give the certification board its own codes and its own administrative autonomy with regards to that. The way it should work in a perfect world is the administratively attached independent agency submits its budget to the bigger department, and then the department presents to the legislature, doesn't touch the independent agency's proposed budget, doesn't advocate for or against, and that's the way it should work, and that's the way it's going to work once we revisit that statute and make it clear.
Do you have any other examples of these administrative attachment?
They're all over. For example, the Public Defender Department is attached to the Administrative Office of the Courts.
Okay.
You have the Border Authority that's administratively attached to the Department of Economic Development. You have the Outdoor Recreation Division is administratively attached to the Department of Economic Development. Those are the ones I could just think of offhand, but I don't know when it started, but we do that from time to time when we create this wonderful new entity. We don't know where to put it, so we just attach it to a department that we think it fits. Like, for example, the Gaming Control Board, which deals with receiving monies from the various tribes on the gaming compact, that's administratively attached, and I honestly don't know where it's attached. But there's all kinds of independent agencies that are directly under the governor, but not under the respective secretaries.
And, you said that this last chunk of language that you said needs to be taken out. Was there a proposal for that in the legislature this past session? Or
it wasn't a standalone proposal, but every year I'm trying to improve the statute. So I did Senate Bill 50, which was the new latest version of the modernization of policing in this state. It was dealt with police training and putting a modern police training curriculum in state statute. And in my bill, it did take away those magic words, but that wasn't the thrust of the bill. The thrust of the bill was police training, but it didn't get across the finish line.
Okay. Do you think, that's something you're hoping for?
I'm hoping to work with the secretary and the governor's office, hopefully to convince them this year that we need to fix that, and hopefully get a message this 30-day session to do just that.
Well, and as far as the law enforcement academy as well, the training part, and like you said, modern training is part of this. I know nobody likes to see the director leave after a year and a half, but is that sort of training and modernizing police training, is that going as you would like to see it at this point? Or?
No, it is not. There is really no police training in state statute except for mandated training, and there's even a problem with that because we mandate so many hours of this, so many hours of that, and cops go through training each year. They need 40 hours of training every 2 years. So when they go to the training every 2 years or so, it's the same training. It's like Groundhog Day. It's the same curriculum. So we need to have faith in our law enforcement academies, give them the flexibility in state statute to deal with things on the ground and things that are happening in that profession ongoingly. So, but it's very difficult to tell my colleagues to remove these statutory requirements because they think, well, the police aren't going to do them unless we make them do them. And it's like, well, no, they're doing them now. We just shouldn't be mandating particular hours. So I see, the look on your face, how hard that is to persuade my colleagues. But we'll fix this relationship between the certification board and DPS either this year or the next year with the outgoing governor or the incoming governor.
And just to be clear, I mean, your intent is for the certification board to have complete independence over its own investigations,
Absolutely.
Misconduct investigations.
Absolutely. And so it may work to administratively attach it somewhere else because when you administratively attach something, they work with the General Services Division on where the office is, where the physical office is. So we thought it made sense to put the certification board there under the DPS umbrella in terms of being on the similar campus. But it may make sense just to put it under the courts
PRC,
or something.
maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Like another example is the new CYFD, the independent oversight of CYFD
Right.
is administratively attached with the Attorney General's office.
And so any other public safety legislation, anything that you were hoping to pass during the session or hoping for this next session that you wanted to talk about?
Thank you. Yes, to me it's probation reform and police training reform. I mean, to me, that's where the rubber hits the road. We could have the best trained officers in the state, modern training. We have the money. We could theoretically build a police academy that rivals the FBI academy nationally. We have that much money. So police training to me is key, moving the state forward. And then probation reform, which we're way behind every other state, in which when someone's on probation, either they're put on probation initially because the sentence is suspended, or they're on probation once they get out of prison and they still have a little bit of time left on their sentence. That's when you can, if you lower recidivism, in other words, if you keep these folks out of the criminal justice system for good, that's really how you make a tremendous impact on lowering crime, is getting former criminals out of the system, not by a slap on the wrist and cutting them loose, but by getting them the rehabilitative services and other types of skill sets that they need to succeed and not going back to a life of crime. So probation reform is on my agenda, police training.
Is there anything in particular with our probation programs that you would say you see as needing to change?
Well, we did a probation bill this year to the credit of the governor's office, the Secretary of Prisons, or technically the Secretary of Department of Corrections. We worked on a probation bill, Senate Bill 375, and we got it passed. It was the first probation bill that's been signed into law in 15 years or so. 6 prior probation bills have been vetoed by the past 2 chief executives. So this one was fantastic. For example, you're on probation for 5 years, and for nonviolent offenders, if they sail through probation and they have no violations in their first 2.5 years or 3 years, they can be taken off probation. And you say, well, why do we want to do that? Because probation officers only have so many hours in the week to work. So if you take a caseload of 80 probationers, you get rid of these 15 or 20 that aren't going to recidivate, then you can focus your attention on these 15 or 20 that have a higher probability of reoffending. So it's just more focused supervision based on modern studies that have been done in every other state.
And our probation officers are overworked, I'm imagining.
No, big time. You can't treat every probationer the same. You cannot treat all 80 or 100 probationers the same. You got to spend 60% of your time on 20% of the probationers. And that's very difficult to legislate with the exception of these kind of good time credits for probationers, for nonviolent probationers. So anyway, it's a tiny tweak. If I went to other states and told them what we did, they'd probably laugh at us because every other state has done much, much more. But it's a step in the right direction for sure.
Okay. So wait, to be clear, a special session that has been.
So the governor was very angry at our lack of success in passing juvenile justice bills and a host of crime bills that she thought should have been on her desk. So she did hint at calling a special session. I don't think that would happen. The governor has the legal authority to call us back, but I have a feeling we'll work with the governor's office between now and January, come up with a package we can all agree on. One thing that must get passed is we need to modernize our juvenile justice laws. Our children's code is 30 years old, and the level of violence and gun violence amongst teenagers is off the chart. So we got to think creatively on how do we deal with that situation in a thoughtful way. We House Bill 255 I thought was the perfect answer, but 20 folks voted no because it didn't go far enough, and 12 folks voted no because it went too far. And so I'm trying to find that middle ground, but at some point my colleagues need to learn to compromise. We compromise on every other issue, but when it comes to crime, people hang their hat on one provision in the bill and can't seem to compromise. That's not fair to the people of this state, and that's what angered the governor.
Well, and the sort of positions on this children's code reform issue, I know I've seen people concerned about basically increasing sentences for child offenders, and then on the other side, I know that District Attorney Sam Bregman, who's now in a campaign for governor, I know he's kind of supported just basically, I guess, holding more youth offenders accountable and creating laws that kind of catch more of them than the current ones do.
Right. There's kind of a general there's two philosophies with criminal law. One is a general deterrent. Is the criminal justice system sending a message to the population that there will be consequences when you commit crimes? Is there a general deterrent? And then is there a specific deterrent for that specific individual? Jail is the perfect specific deterrent because that specific person can't recommit a crime. So there's a big push by a lot of folks to add more crimes to the list in which a prosecutor can pull a juvenile into the adult system.
Which is right now
Right? So, for example, in Bill House Bill 255, we added one crime to the list, which I thought was reasonable. That one crime pushed a lot of the ultra-left Democrats over the edge. They couldn't vote for it. And then, of course, the Republicans as a caucus voted no. They're in the minority, so they don't have to govern. Democrats do. So they voted no because they wanted 20 crimes on the list. So if you can't vote for one crime and then you're not going to... It was very unfortunate that we could not reach a compromise on that juvenile justice bill. But just for the listeners, longer sentences does not deter crime. Longer sentences does not successfully fight crime. What fights crime is getting caught, the probability of getting caught, and the swiftness with which somebody is successfully prosecuted. And in order to successfully prosecute violent crimes, you need a witness. So we need to beef up our victim advocacy and our relationship with those that are victimized by violent crimes, because it is a scary, horrible thing to sit in a chair in the same room with the person that committed horrible violence against you and say that's the one, Your Honor. So it's very difficult, and laws don't just magically make crime go away. It takes leadership. It takes labor-intensive work by police detectives and prosecutors to get us to that point where we have better public safety outcomes. The people of the state are screaming for better public safety, and my colleagues need to answer that, need to listen very attentively to those screams.
And so you think juvenile crime is going to be kind of front and center for the next session as well.
I believe so, yes. I believe so, yeah. Because we have a lot of old arbitrary laws, and we have difficult choices. Do you put somebody in the adult system and send them up for 30 years, or do you keep them in the juvenile system and they get out when they're 21? There needs to be a middle ground to those two choices. That's what may happen. But anyway, yeah. So criminal juveniles with guns is a big deal. I know crime is going down, but the fear of crime and the frustration with regards to crime is going up.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, very great to be here.
You. And thank you for listening to Around the Roundhouse, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican. This was public safety reporter Nicholas Gilmore with State Senator Antonio Moe Maestas.